Instead, we have the opportunity to make a habit of empathy, to recognize ourselves in each other.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and I'm here today with Gillian Vellet, sorry, and we're going to be talking about how to build a culture of empathy. And Gillian works in the art therapy field, so we're going to be talking about how we can use art therapy to build a culture of empathy. Would you like to kind of introduce yourself a little bit more?
Yeah, thank you, Edwin. Yes, I've been working for 14 years in this area. I started in art education in South Africa. And I guess I reached a kind of crisis point in teaching where it was really about changing career. Did I choose to continue in art education, or did I really see that the processes that I was taking the students through were depth psychology processes, and that meant that I needed further training psychologically to really facilitate the deeper healing that was really necessary within a post-apartheid nation like South Africa. So I returned to Canada and I trained for 2 years in Toronto at the Tati Institute. And that changed my life. I returned to South Africa, moved back into private practice, and worked with such a diverse grouping of people there that it altered how I perceived the relationship, how I perceived empathy, how to create, really co-create a partnership model that its basis is rooted in empathy of the heart, the soul. How do you meld those? And especially with dynamic change and diversity, which is the order of in our world today, how do you work with this complex alchemy?
Yeah. So, how did you kind of get interested in empathy? Kind of, if you look back through your life, to the present, how did your interest and insights in empathy kind of evolve to the point where you are now?
It's a really important question historically. Hey, Edwin, I
Hmm.
really respect you asking it, because those seeds are sown in childhood, in that innocence of what we are and the incredible wisdom that the innocent in us carries. And as a child, we moved from country to country, culture to culture. So my life was a perpetual change and all about diversity. The only way I could survive was to really understand the cultures and the peoples that we were integrating or attempting to integrate into over and over. So, there by the grace of God go I, over and over. I had to learn the language, the different languages, the different nonverbal languages of other cultures. I had to learn how with an open heart you can cross bridges that are potential divides, the boundaries that we hold around us bodily or territorially, that those can be permeable when the heart and the soul is really attempting to find union.
Do you have any kind of specific story of how that happened? Like, do you remember some kind of a specific instance or some kind of interaction that's kind of very specific?
Oh, I've got so many. I remember sitting in classrooms with Indigenous children in Canada when we lived here. And then when we moved to United States, I again remember being in classes with South Americans and starting to learn Spanish, uh, never understanding why. And then moving to South Africa, where I was interfacing with Dutch people and getting in touch with my French Huguenot roots, and having to work with the Black nation, the African culture, and the richness of their multitude of tongues, hey? and dialects, and then marrying an Italian. So I moved into a continental, passionate familia. Yeah. So you understand, all of the children in our family have married into other cultures, Edwin. So it was always weaving these threads. But I think with the children, that when a little girl came in to see me once, and she was mute, she was not able to speak. And I knew intuitively that I needed to respect her process, because in the school system, they were forcing her to move into language. And I knew there must be some underlying trauma around verbalizing a real feeling. So we stayed with the image for 6 or 7 sessions in silence. She would come in and just image, and then watch me carefully how I would respond to the image. Okay, attuning, constantly looking for that sense of attunement non-verbally, Edwin.
Let me just kind of repeat
Yeah.
what I'm hearing is that as a child, we're in a lot of different environments, and we're learning a lot of different languages, and you met people from a lot of different cultures. So that was somehow something that nurtured your empathy, so you could connect to this wide variety of people.
Yes.
Is that right?
Oh, yes, it has strengthened that capacity, which is fundamentally rooted in empathy. If you cannot place yourself in another culture's skin, there is no bridging of the heart and the soul. In a land like South Africa, where racism was part of our ideology, part of our belief system there, before Mandela brought about that spiritual change into a democracy, you must understand, empathy was destroyed in that nation. People did not trust each other. There was no movement to really bond as a kinship clan, as a fraternity, yeah, as that extended family system that is really humanly and spiritually what we're about. If we value empathy, it's always what is greater than the self.
Right. One thing I could ask just a little bit, you've kind of moved a little bit to the far side. I was wondering, maybe you could move your computer a little, or there, so we can kind of have you framed a little bit better. Okay, thanks. So it was after apartheid, you felt kind of repressed empathy then, and kind of connection, and kind of divided people. And is that correct?
Yes. Completely. It was profound. You must know, coming back after my training from a first world nation, where I also in Canada perceived racism, but very denied and hidden, and returning to my country and having to, with post-apartheid, where all of that infrastructure was dismantling, and we were moving into massive, diverse healing processes and exposure around the injustices, the social injustice that had occurred, and attempting reconciliation, through all of that incredible transformational process that was happening and still is happening in South Africa. I returned from South Africa in December, after sharing a dance movement, the Biodanza dance movement space, with many colleagues there, and seeing that change is still underfoot, even with the white people there, still the empowerment across the board, because with racism, the oppressor is injured as much as the person that is abused or oppressed.
Well, that kind of leads into kind of what's been kind of a main question for me, which has been how do we go about building a culture of empathy? And I was wondering if you had kind of thoughts about that. And I guess it would be maybe how you do it through the arts, and
Oh,
since that's
the
your real
arts.
interest.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can give you examples. I've brought examples today of art psychotherapy with different clients to share with you, if that would help you now
Sure.
to
Uh-huh.
almost start to create. I don't have those pictures with me because I would have to get consent to show you those pictures, but I really support the visual videoing that you are doing, which I think is so rich and educational. When we move into like creating, hopefully, you and I, if we can do that in the longer term, visual imagery that is narrated, like animated, then you're going to move into that dynamic realm around the complexity of how you construct, reconstruct empathic connection.
Yeah, we were talking about you just seen Jeremy Rifkin's Empathic
Yep.
Civilization, and we were just talking about experimenting with perhaps creating metaphors of empathy and the opposite, having dialogues and using art around that to explore the topic more.
You know, in South Africa, there's a famous artist, William Kentridge, and he's a protest artist. He's an activist, a political activist. So, in many ways, art has a long history of being a vehicle, an effective vehicle for political change, because it's a mouthpiece that speaks emotions and feelings that are repressed within the social body politic. So, say the examples that I share with you today. A young boy, 11 years old, came to see me because of just his perception of stressful, ongoing school experiences of exclusion, rejection, verbal abuse, and being bullied by other children. And he created an image of multiple metaphors that he turned into a narrative, like a narrative storyboard, Edwin, where he explored his fear and inner conflict around expressing his authentic feelings. His creative process was learning how to become more empathetic with himself through visual narrative, through the creative process of transformation. So he constructed this complex underwater world where a frog was wanting to leave the shallow waters and dive deep into the ocean to the depths, where the frog started to have a dialogue with the octopus, who then shape-shifted into a turtle with a broken shell. The turtle wanted to befriend two dolphins, which were swimming towards him. He said the turtle's strength is that it can be in two places at the same time. So he quote, prayed to God for a growth spurt which will make him as big and as strong as the dolphins, because God's love at the end of the day is like solid, like a rock, he says to me. You know, there's his metaphor, and look how he transmutes it. It alters as he gains more and more confidence to then spiritually connect and ask for the help that he needs in terms of his perception so accurately of his physical limitation in that moment, because he's different to a lot of his peers. He's a very different boy child. He's a very sensitive boy child. So I worked with another client, Edwin, who uses a metaphor of light extensively through her work. She's a 43-year-old female writer with schizophrenia that she has lived with for 23 years. She's just published a book in German, and she's going to be translating it this year into English. It's going to be her creative project. The title of the book is A Life Worth Living: My Unforgettable Journey with the Illness of Schizophrenia. And on her book cover, she uses the metaphor of a small, tender plant that becomes a healthy, strong tree. And interestingly, in her first session with me, she drew in a massive oak tree in full bloom, multiple branches and very, very deep roots into the earth. And this was like a really interesting precursor for underlying anxiety that was attached to her trip to Germany, where she was going to have to move into the public eye and start to communicate and advocate her book in the public there, in her own community, although she resides in Canada now. So she explored darkness and depression that she's been working with for years, the critical voices, destructive voices that she lives with constantly. And she found self-empathy, again, was the value that she had to creatively learn to practice imaging and dialoguing with the voices and thereby be able to befriend the voices in the end. She said to live through and be transformed to light, courage, and hope.
Did she use the word self-empathy, or is that just something you added to it?
That is my framing
okay.
of what is taking place, just as with the boy that I shared with you.
Well, this is great because, you know, one problem I found that in talking about empathy, there's a kind of a lack of clearness about what the definition of empathy is. And I don't know if I've mentioned this to you, but I've got kind of like a 4-step or 4 parts of empathy kind of understanding. And the first part is self-empathy, which is kind of self-awareness, self-mindfulness, being sensory awareness, self-knowledge. The second part is kind of mirrored empathy, or using mirror neurons to kind of integrate with others. And this third part...
That's relational. You see,
it's what?
That of necessity. The mirror neurons happens in the dyad, like you and I right now.
Right. We're seeing each other and kind of...
Yeah, sensately, but emotionally, there's a connection here to souls in space and time, right? There's either a resonance where, yes, what we say has meaning for each other, or it has no meaning. So if it has meaning, there's an incredible release of oxytocin into our system. The parasympathetic body relaxes. We feel, oh God, we feel heard, listened to, respected, and in that moment, we solidify empathetic bonds, which are kinship bonds. In this moment, you and I could be brother, sister. So that shared empathy is how you build community.
Yeah. And I'll just finish this model out. And then the third part is perspective taking, or what I call imaginative empathy. So it's a little bit like acting. You know, someone takes someone else's role and they can see the world kind of cognitively and emotionally from the other person's point of view. And then the fourth part is what I call empathic action. That as we have connected, we can take action together. And it's like the blocks to our working together are removed. Yes. So what I'm really excited about in talking to you is I hadn't thought of it so much about the art therapy, you know, using metaphors and art and imagery is a way to kind of do the self-empathy. So it's like taking these different feelings that we have, you know, become mindful of them, and then that we start creating dialogues sort of between the different parts of ourselves, the different experiences that we have. And that dialogue is almost like an empathic dialogue that takes place. And then we kind of have that oxytocin that you're talking about, that release. So I'm really quite, it's a new kind of an insight that I just got from talking to you about that. So.
But that's beautiful. Do you see your integration here of all the research that you're presently working with, which is so rich? You've just taken that from our dialogue and you've woven a new thread. It's like a new neurological pathway has just opened for you. And that is what art psychotherapy does so effectively, because it's a creative learning process. So you're constantly activating from the sensorial and the motor tips of the fingers that are holding the medium, the material that activates neurologically right up into the brain. So there's a new neurological pathway every time you image and move into then verbally, only at the end, dialoguing with, what is this feeling? I want to name this, and I want to own the good and the bad of this. And it's with people. I'm working with a woman who's just come through. She's a cancer survivor. And when she has imaged her body image in the before she went in for the surgery, what that body image looked like and the post-surgery image is like profound. So that, can you see, she is having in her healing process to come to terms with, what does it mean for me to be compassionate and empathic towards myself, given the trauma and the stress of this engagement with cancer and what that means personally, but also culturally.
So it's kind of like a self-empathy into her pain and cancer and her experience with it. So she's kind of being present with it. And
Exactly. Do you see, the greater the capacity to be present with really fragile and vulnerable feelings, Edwin, that will birth empathy. Empathy is not excluding discomfort. And that's where a lot of people do not understand it sufficiently or minimize it. Empathy of necessity means I have to feel what you're feeling. If you're suffering, that does impact upon me. And I want to share that is impacting me. So that when I can link and connect with you in that way, so that you know that I value you as a human being in this moment. I have compassion for your suffering.
so it's like being really present with the fear, the alienation, the loneliness, the suffering. So it's not like suppressing it, but empathizing is kind of being present with those feelings within ourselves and within others. And it seems like that very process of being present kind of releases oxytocin or something, and it helps actually ameliorate those feelings and create more of a sense of space and openness to, it seems to be that it almost creates a sense of space and openness for greater creativity to happen, to problem solve.
Absolutely, because you see, the worth in that moment is valued. Fundamentally, you as a human being is valued. Our innocent inner child, a lot of us have never experienced that from birth. So we carry this metaphor of this emotional hole inside of us, so that we're always wanting to satiate and feel full in the nourishment that comes through attachment. That is the bonding, mother and child bonding initially, but then the attachment of that sense of belonging, sense of friendships, sense of family that I spoke about, and fraternity earlier, that somehow we are in this together, that I'm not alone. My identity, I have this sense of belonging to something bigger that is taking place on the planet. And even in this moment in time with you and I, as we speak, others will see this and either resonate with it or not. But that there's an opening to the complexity of the tapestry that underlies empathy, that I feel many people minimize or do not go into its depth. And its depth is, as you have perceptively always seen, is through the metaphor and the value that you attach to that metaphor, which is a creative, imaginative, intuitive, and fundamentally right brain activity that bridges with the left brain of language ultimately. But the creative process of necessity is one of silence and the movement interiorly into that place of peace within.
Yeah,
It's the core,
mhm. That
right?
yeah, what you're saying, what you're kind of the first part of it that was seemed to be that as we kind of empathize, I mean, well, not that we empathize, it's that it's almost like a biological need that we have in terms of having
Yes,
connection. It's like we're kind of
yes,
like biologically wired
yes,
to need that connection, and when we don't get it, when we don't get seen, our you know, from maybe childhood, different things get kind of repressed, that we're actually,
yes.
you know, I guess maybe we're kind of alienated from ourselves or from others by that part of us not being seen. So, and it's not just something that, hey, this is something we need to do. It's like, it's almost like a biological function that we have, and it might be, have been developed, let's say, for creating, you know, the social cohesion of humans, which are kind of like pack animals, you know, or group beings. And so this is like fundamental to, it seems to me, like it's fundamental to who we are as human beings.
Absolutely, I support you, Edwin. It's very important what you're saying. I mean, I've also got an elder client that I'm a senior that I'm working with at the moment, 75 years old. And I'm just to take this into the continuum of maturation, hey, that this empathy does not stop or start at specific developmental stages. My God, this is the ongoing, it's like this eternal rebirthing process. He's 75 and at the end of his life on dialysis, and he was a psychologist lecturer at the university. He he was very creative and musical. Unfortunately, there is a loss in his marriage with his partner, but he has always stayed in connection with a spiritual community that through the art psychotherapy, he moved back to valuing that sense of communion again, of also having the courage and the strength to ask for help from that community because he knows he does not have long. So, and he is fearful of dying. So before he dies, he's bringing about all of this kind of change with his children, his grandchild, and himself from his own core of a newfound self-love that did not exist before. He explored this. So this is the magic that we can weave creatively when we enter into creative, collaborative, shared processes of imaging, dialoguing, voicing, dancing. Yeah, it's that whole cycle of life that becomes so much more enriched when we engage and participate in the life process, where we don't fear it, like we don't fear death. This man at 75, every session is around his fear of death, and it is profound. So he is just like an archetype for us of a culture of fearing death.
So so you're saying he has a lot of fear of death, and you're kind of doing kind of art to bring up those fears, and for him to kind of be present with those fears and to kind of empathize with that fear. Yeah.
Exactly. That he doesn't criticize himself, judge himself for being so fearful, and for the feelings of vulnerability that imminent death brings to bear for all of us. But
Or
that
avoidance, maybe, too, was one of those other ones, kind of the alienation and avoidance.
exactly, Edwin. And it is in that denial that you cannot grieve prior to your death, which doesn't bring you any dignity. Yes, sometimes at the end of our life, there are many, many losses. And if we do not have that opportunity to grieve, I believe spiritually, we lose a sense of dignity. So the empathy again comes into play, that again you have to return to the place of tenderness, of deep gentleness, kindness to your own heart and soul. This is fundamentally the work with this man every single session. And I see how the subtle changes of him learning to love himself again and be kind to himself, which he's always given to others, but never been able to give to himself. And that created an imbalance in his life, where he became only concerned with excessive caretaking of others, never receiving any reciprocity in the process, that depleted him energetically.
So it seems there's kind of two parts to that. One is kind of the self-empathy and the self-compassion, where he's working with those feelings and kind of being present with them. And that has a kind of a nurturing quality in itself. And the second part is he's doing it, it sounds like, in conjunction with you. So you're kind of you're bringing your presence and your empathy to the relationship as well. So he's kind of like benefiting from your empathy. If I would that be accurate understanding? Or
Completely. And that is the most therapeutic relationship in how we are trained psychotherapeutically, is that empathic connection is the alliance, the therapeutic alliance that we need to have in place. And it is about fundamental presence of being with another, in the good and the bad of whatever has to be shared. There can be no judgment or criticism of the other. Then you have a misalignment. There's an injury immediately, emotionally. Okay, there's a cut, there's a disconnect. And when that happens, you must know the movement, the healing, the ability to feel safe with you is broken. So that is always, yeah, sorry.
I just wonder, are there other blocks to empathy that you see? You said judgment was one block to empathy. What other blocks really come up for you that you see?
With empathy is also an energetic, and it's nonverbal, Edwin. So just in body language, as an energy field, we're electromagnetic, okay? So we are emitting frequencies, vibrations, resonances all the time through our voice, fundamentally. If we're not mindful and aware of our own energy, we can unwittingly impact another, brutally sometimes, through complete insensitivity, lack of empathy, lack of resonance, lack of capacity to accept what the other is showing us in that moment, that may be triggering something inside of us, a real fear. What they bring to bear in their sadness, say, is triggering something so deep, a loss so deep inside of us that we can't articulate in that moment. But that if we honor that moment in time and share with them that we are feeling this triggering, and we want to share it as a way to open to a mutual vulnerability, you bridge and build trust. So, and that, yeah.
Oh no, sorry. Well, yeah, I see that in terms of like sympathy. You know, sometimes people say, "Oh, sympathy can kind of be a block to empathy." It's that I'm feeling your what's kind of going on for you, and it kind of makes me fearful or something like that. But you're saying that that's okay, that those feelings come up. It's just a matter of sharing where you are as well. And then
Yes.
that actually allows for a deepening of the empathic connection at that point.
Yeah.
So it's important that when something comes up for us, that we kind of share that as well, not just being, it's like the person you're talking about, he was just giving empathy for everyone, you're saying, or listening, but he wasn't
Yes.
really sharing what was going on for him. And so he was getting perhaps detached or
Exactly. Exactly.
and so
And it's been many, many years with that disconnect, eh, Edwin? Can you imagine where you have reinforced neurologically this pattern of disconnect? You must know depression will be the end. And this man had a severe history of depression, always never explored fully, been in and out of many forms of psychology intervention, but was not able to shift or open it. But the creative process somehow has touched his heart, so that he's able to make himself vulnerable in a creative way through the metaphor again in the picture, where he's just depicting energy, his energy for the day every time he enters. So that, wow, that gives you a really very fast indicator of the emotional and vibrational energy field of the other.
yeah, I just wanted to mention here, one thing is your video camera has a autofocus to it, as well as a light balance. So as you're moving, which I really love the motion that you're doing, that we have the light balance, the blurring, and we could say that it's a creative metaphor of life somehow. So, but just to kind of acknowledge that I hope it's not that's not confusing or distracting to anyone kind of watching this, but that's just kind of what's happening.
It's energy. You see, it's kinesthetic. I'm very kinesthetic. You understand? That's my inner child. So, to be static. See, for me, engagement of necessity is about expressivity. Yeah, I'm an expressive arts therapist because I dance as well. So I use my body to communicate sometimes what I cannot say. Yeah?
Yeah. So I'm quite like that. I hit the wrong button here, but yeah, I'm kind of like that as well. So I really like to move. I hit the wrong button here, so you're not seeing my video, but I'm still
okay.
I have another channel. I do see you, so.
Okay, that's okay, Edwin.
Yeah. So let's see. We've been going for about 40 minutes. I'm really excited about this whole art therapy and the doing drawing and animation and the dialogue. So I'm really looking forward to kind of working more around that with empathy. Maybe we should.
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah, maybe we should kind of come to some sort of a conclusion for now.
Absolutely.
Do you have any kind of final things that we should cover for this call that you think are important to still cover? We can have another call too, so ongoing.
Yeah.
But
I think that could be really exciting for me, because as we deepen our connection, our connectivity, and we are exploring and in our different ways in 2 different countries as well, I think this is just going to deepen and enrich in terms of, I think, a deeper understanding, even from both of us, of what constitutes empathy and the magic, the ingredients, the kind of specificity that I think is missing in the present literature. It is very, very difficult to find any real articulation of what we are discussing Edwin, and that's why I so value what you're doing, because you are opening that up and you're doing it in an educative way. So I really am so grateful to you for this. There is a book that I'm one of the writers of. There's many different art therapists that have put together work that we have done throughout the world using art psychotherapy in terms of healing and bringing in about further empathy in the world. And I would love to share this book title with you, because
Sure.
it's being released now in the United States and Canada. The editor just emailed me today, and it's called Art Therapy and Postmodernism, Creative Healing Through a Prism. And it's at Caversham bookstores. It was published by Jessica Kingsley in England. And in Canada, it is represented by the UBC Press. But I would love you to try and access this book as well, Edwin. I think it could open up to even further potential in art psychotherapy.
Yeah, I would really like to do more with this in terms of more interviews, and what I would hope is that maybe some of the art therapists would get together and write a book about empathy and art therapy. So kind of take what we're doing and really go into depth and get a kind of a community dialogue going around it, and as well as having some real activities that we could do around this. I mean, there's a simple one which I've done before, which is kind of the metaphor. You know, for example, what is your metaphor of empathy? The metaphor I have is empathy is like a cornucopia, and I've actually done I did a workshop a class I did at UC Berkeley in the Peace and Conflict Studies program. I actually had students there write out what empathy, do a drawing of what empathy meant, or a metaphor drawing of what empathy was. And you know, it's like every student had a different drawing, and they were really a lot of fun. And mine was a cornucopia. And for me, it's that empathy is like this internal cornucopia, right? Just being aware of all of our internal feelings, insights, as well as sharing that with others. So it really, we each have our own cornucopia, and if we can kind of share it, you know, it's a very rich and you know, fulfilling experience that we can have to kind of deepen our experience of life. And so that's kind of just one simple activity. Another one would be is, what is, you know, empathy, and what is the opposite of empathy? So, and I was mentioning to you earlier that one of the people I interviewed, I had her do these metaphors, and hers was a hands holding was her metaphor of empathy, and the opposite was a tray of ice cubes. And then to have the two actually have a dialogue, the empathy and the non-empathy, and it was just a riot. It was just so insightful. And so I would love to kind of do some of those kind of activities, and you know, together with you at some point. So
I look forward to that, Edwin. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for this interview. It's really, really rich.
Okay. Well, then any final thoughts? Is that it?
Oh, it's very, very lovely. For me, it's a start of a creative project that we're going to share, and I'm very excited. And let us set up the next session, and I am going to start documenting specifically empathy with all of my clients now. I think I really want to pursue this in my own writing. So thank you for that, for really bringing me to focus with greater clarity on something that is very important in our culture, hey?
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.